Okay, so let's get back to this essential question of how are the table and the rule of a relationship connected? So now we're going to explore this with some donuts. So we have this batter, and we put this into the machine, and it produces a donut. So we have an input and an output, and whatever changes our input into its output is the machinery. So that's what we do with the input to get to the output. Okay, so let's go back to our bricks example. So we have our chart here, our table here that we had, and we have our rule. So every time we choose an x value, so let's choose 2, we put that in for our input, and we have an output of 70. And that is, so that's our output or our y value. So let's try this again. We're going to input 5. So we input x equals 5. So we get 15 times 5 plus 40, which is 115. So that is our output then. So let's take a look here. And time to get to this point. So the big question here is, how does a rule build pairs of numbers? So if we look at y equals 15x plus 40, and we have our table here. So when we substitute in 5 for our for x, and then we simplify, that gives us our y value. So in essence here, the rule tells you what to do to the input, or your x value, to get your output, which is your y value. So what does this rule say to do to the input? Well, we have this negative 8x, so what it's saying is we're going to multiply by negative 8, and then we're going to add 100. So how does rule build a pair of numbers? So let's fill in this table here. So we can use this rule to build a pair of numbers. So we have our independent variable, that's the one that we get to choose, and then our dependent variable, which depends on whatever we chose for our independent variable. So if we choose 0 for x, we put in y equals 20 times 0 minus 400. But 20 times 0 is 0 minus 400, so y equals negative 400. We can then, so in the machine type form here, we are inputting a 0, and our output is negative 400. So let's then choose an input value of 1. So now we have y equals 20 times 1 minus 400. So whenever we have this, we get 20 times 1 is 20, minus 400, and 20 minus 400 is negative 380. So if we look at our machine form, when we input 1, we get back negative 380. If we input 20, y equals 20 times 20 minus 400. Well, 20 times 20 is 400. So 400 minus 400, well, that's 0. So if we input 20, our output is 0. Let's look at another example. So here we've been given inputs to use. So and our rule is y equals negative 2x minus 15. So when we have this going on, we have y equals negative 2 times 0, which is our chosen input, minus 15. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, and then 0 minus 15 is negative 15. So our output, or y value here, is negative 15. And here you can see how the machine works with this. And then if 5 is our input, So we substitute 5 in for x, so negative 2 times 5 minus 15. Well, negative 2 times 5 is negative 10 minus 15, and negative 10 minus 15 is negative 25, and you can see again how that works with the machine. Let's take a look at another example. So here our rule is y equals negative 40 minus 2x. So our first input value is going to be negative 5. So when we input negative 5, we get negative 40 minus 2 times negative 5. So we get negative 40 minus negative 10. But remember from our integer review that when we subtract a negative, we add the opposite. So this becomes negative 40 plus 10. And negative 40 plus 10 is negative 30. So we have negative 5, negative 30. So when we input negative 5, our output is negative 30. Let's take a look here when we input 0. So now if we input 0, or substitute 0 in for x, we get negative 40 minus 2 times 0. Negative 40 minus, well, 2 times 0 is 0, and negative 40 minus 0 is negative 40. So when we have an input of 0, we have an output of negative 40. So now we're going to fill in this table, y equals negative x. So let's take a look at this. We just have negative x here. So this means that our output is the opposite of our input. So if we choose 0 as our input, we're going to get 0 as our output because we don't have a negative 0, so it's just 0. If we choose 1 as our input, the opposite of 1 is negative 1, so our output is negative 1. If we chose negative 4 for our input, our output would be y equals negative 4. Well, the opposite of negative 4 is positive 4, so this output value would be positive 4.